Okay, guys, here we go. Week 4 college fantasy football is here. And after this week, the season's going to be a month over already. And it's like, where has it gone? I mean, for many of you guys, we talked about this last week. We talked about some of the slow starts folks have gotten off to with the bad weather, the canceled games. We're now heading into the 4th week of the season. And sort of here's where I assess, when you look at your team, you need to assess where you're at. I think it's really important that you don't overreact. I don't think that it's important. I don't think you should put too much stock into being comfortable where you're at right now either if you're sitting undefeated. The one thing that I've learned over the years of playing college fantasy football and being involved with this every year is that it is a long season. It doesn't seem like it. I know it doesn't because the playoffs are going to be here sooner than later for most of you guys. Whether your playoffs start at week 11 or week 12, we're a third of the way through the season at this particular point. So here's where I stand. Here's my insight and my experience with college fantasy football, especially for some of you guys that play in a full FBS format. The schedule is littered with a lot of early season mismatches because the way that the schedule is really configured with Power Fives predominantly playing Group of Fives through the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season, even some Group of Fives, Power Fives playing FCS opponents. And so here's my take on this. You really just need to be in contention at this particular point. If it's been a hard season up until this point for some of you guys. Maybe you're 0-3, maybe you're 1-2, 2-1, but don't feel comfortable about your roster. Here's what I say: there's a lot of you guys that have some of these Power 5 players that have really taken advantage of mismatches, but conference play is coming up, so you've got to really put some depth on that roster. You've had a number of you guys that are being affected. You've got the MAC conference players. You've got the Sun Belt conference players. You've run up against some of the Power 5 teams in the first 2 or 3 weeks, bad weather, and all of a sudden you're sitting 1-2. You feel like you're kind of behind the 8 ball, but in all honesty, you're not, guys, because when these conference games really kick in, that's when college fantasy football, that's when the season goes to a new level. So here's what I'm going to tell you. This is a really important week for a lot of you all that are 0-3. But if you're sitting 1-2 right now, if you come out of this weekend 2-2 and not feeling great about your team up until this point, you're really in a good position. The schedule's going to start turning over. We're going to get into some of the conference play with some of the smaller conferences. And here's what I say: when you litter your roster on how you configure it, if you're one of those guys that have a bunch of Sun Belt teams, a bunch of MAC teams, a bunch of Conference USA teams, this is where you start to take off. This is where some of the matchups start to play into your favor, and really important to hold on to some of the guys that maybe have not performed up until this point. It's coming. Let's be patient. We're going to run through a lot of the games, tell you what I'm looking at for all the games through the entire slate, where some of the question marks, where are some of the ones that we, and me particularly, have missed? Who are some of the players we've hit? And maybe who are some of the one-week wonders that you guys can find some fantasy gold from this particular weekend? So I know there's a game on tonight, guys. And you know what? Let me just say this. Thank all of you all for coming on live. Thank everybody for watching the show and supporting the channel. The one thing that I have to say is that you guys have been great. The feedback has been tremendous. I have been really worried about these shows going a little longer because they have been running an hour, 15 hour, 20 minutes the last couple of weeks. But the one thing that I've learned is that as long as we stick to the format, as long as I am sticking to college fantasy football, you guys don't mind listening. The more you guys get, the better you guys feel. Everybody benefits from it. So my thing is I'm not going to rush through it. I'm going to try to take my time, but I'm going to try to be quick. I don't want to be too long-winded, as I have a habit of getting sometimes. But this is for you guys. This is all at this show is a culmination of all of the homework that I have done all week, and I've got notes in front of me, guys. This is like this show is like my exam right now. All the prep work is done, and I'm giving you guys the results, and here we go. So we're going to start it off right now. Obviously, we're going to skip over that Tulsa-Temple matchup that's going on right now tonight. And right off the bat, tomorrow night, we get a great fantasy matchup. Florida Atlantic playing at Central Florida. At least we think it is going to be a great fantasy matchup. And, you know, last week I was touting that FAU passing game, and Devin Singletary, right on cue, as I knew he would do, ran for 5 touchdowns for you guys. So I do think we can expect a little bit more from the FAU passing game this week. Chris Roberson, yeah, you've obviously have Javon Durant. You've got Willie Wright, Devin Singletary. All I feel are good fantasy plays this weekend. And over at Central Florida, of course, you've got Mackenzie Milton, who's sitting there near the top for us in the standings. You've got Killins at running back. You've got Otis Anderson. You've got Snelson. I mean, you can go right down the line. Gabriel Davis, Trey Nixon. I mean, the line doesn't stop. Here's the only thing that I'm really concerned about in this game. I think when you look at players that can possibly go off, big-time performances, I don't know if I see that from Gabriel Davis, Trey Nixon, Dredrick Snelson. Your big ceiling players in this game are most likely going to be Mackenzie Milton, Devin Singletary, and quite possibly Robeson, the quarterback of FAU, and maybe even Durant. But I think this is one of those games, you're in a full FBS format, you've got one of those guys, and you're debating flex position or not. You got to go ahead and sneak a guy in that's in this particular matchup, because I think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. Next matchup tomorrow night, we're looking at Penn State at Illinois. The one thing I say, if you have Illinois, maybe Mike Epstein is a good play. Obviously, Trace McSorley is going to be a starter in there for you. Over at Penn State, you've got a couple of different options at receiver, whether it's Tompkins, whether it's Hamler, whether it's Juwan Johnson. I think Miles Sanders is definitely going to be a solid play. I'm actually looking, you know, I go back to last week's show with Travis Etienne, and I said, I'm waiting for that game where Etienne really goes off. And the last week, he finally delivered. Not that he wasn't delivering up to that point, but he really went big for a lot of you guys. I'm really waiting for that moment from Miles Sanders. Whether we get it remains to be seen, but you have to be at least satisfied, especially if you were in a Power 5 league, that he's at least been consistent for you over the first 3 weeks of the season. Washington State late tomorrow night playing at USC. I think Washington State, the matchup really doesn't scare me. I think if you have Gardner Minshew, I think if you have James Williams, obviously if you've got one of the receivers, Martin, for sure is going to be in your lineup. Maybe Calvin, maybe take a shot on a Winston, or maybe Patman. It really depends on the depth of your roster. Where my eyes are really focused on in this matchup is that I feel like we already know what we're getting from Washington State now, 3 weeks into the season. I don't know for sure what we're getting yet from USC. Stephen Carr has been a huge disappointment. I am warning everyone not to drop Stephen Carr yet. I almost feel as if with USC dropping 2 games right now, JT Daniels hasn't exactly been the sharpest looking quarterback, and he's very young, guys, one of the youngest quarterbacks in college football. I almost feel like the USC offense, we're kind of ready to pass the baton a little bit more. I think they're going to be ready to put the ball in the hands of Stephen Carr a little more. I have no information that makes me believe that that is a guarantee, but if there's one thing to help the passing game, it's going to be put the ball in the hands of the running game. Who's their best running back? Undoubtedly, Carr has the most talent. I think he has to get more touches. I think it's only a matter of time. And I think on the outside, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tyler Vaughns, I mean, he just hasn't been there like Stephen Carr. But if there was one guy in this matchup my eyes are really on this week, it's on Stephen Carr. I'm waiting for him to take off. I think he will be explosive sometime in the next week or two. And all of you guys that have been patiently waiting on Carr, I'm hoping the next week or two tells us everything. Because if we don't get it in the next week or two, then we probably won't get it at all. But I hate to put a guy like Stephen Carr and throw him out on the waiver wire if you have the depth to hold on to him. Let's go into the Saturday matchups, guys, and we're going to go right into a big one in the SEC. Georgia playing on the road at Missouri. Obviously, Mecole Hardman has been a great find for many of you guys, not only in Power 5, but in the full FBS formats. I think DeAndre Swift has been the big uncertainty, the big question mark, the big disappointment up until this point. Remember last year, we had Chubb and Michelle. I mean, both of those guys were worth starting every week. I kind of feel we're going to get into that as Georgia gets into conference play. I think you're going to see Swift involved a lot more. I think you're going to see Holyfield even involved more as well. I think those are going to be the two main guys now that we're getting into SEC play. I think we're going to get more from both of them. I'm expecting Swift to actually take his game to the next level. I have Holyfield slightly ahead in the rankings this week, and a lot of that is just based on confidence from what we've seen already. But I do think that if you have Swift and your back's up against the wall and you need to get him in there, to go ahead and do that. Over on the Missouri side now, obviously we had Emmanuel Hall, who was a little banged up. It looks like he's going to play. He's probable. You even have Drew Lock, who has backed up last year's performance so far up until this point with a new coach coming on, with a new coordinator coming in. Here's where that Missouri offense is really going to get tested. Georgia coming in, Missouri playing at home. I do think Missouri can have some success. I just don't know how much they're going to have. I am a little worried about Drew Lock. I am a little worried about Emmanuel Hall. I am a little worried about Albert O, the tight end. As far as running back goes, and let's go Missouri running back, I'm not going to say this week, but long term for me, and I sent this out in my exclusive email earlier in the week, I like Larry Roundtree, and it's not just because he's got more carries already than Demarie Crockett. I just think he looks better. To me, he's just a better back. I think long term, in my opinion, Roundtree is the better back to own over Crockett moving forward. We'll see how that plays out. I've made some pretty good calls on running backs up until this point this year, especially, as what we've seen so far over with Auburn and Jatarvius Whitlow. So we'll see where that plays out, but I do think that Roundtree is the name to own at Missouri running back moving forward. Notre Dame matchup playing at Wake Forest, and a lot of emails coming in this week in regards to that Notre Dame offense. Obviously, I'm not starting any of the, I'm not starting Wimbush this week. There's just too many question marks around Wimbush right now. A lot of guys have really jumped on Tony Jones. The one thing that I'll say is that Tony Jones and Jafar Armstrong up until this point haven't looked like the next best thing. They've been very solid, very serviceable. But remember, Dexter Williams is likely coming back next week. And given what we have seen up until this point, I think if Dexter Williams is out there on your waiver wire at this particular point, he's a guy that maybe you invest in right now before the weekend hits. Grab him as a free agent, and then you save yourself a waiver addition next week. He could be worth a grab if you have the depth on your roster to add Dexter Williams. And over at Wake Forest, look, Notre Dame's defense isn't bad, guys, and Wake Forest has, particularly Sam Hartman, has looked very impressive for a young guy. I think Greg Dortch is going to have some success here against that Notre Dame defense. I thought Lipscomb found some spots in that Notre Dame defense last week. I think Dortch is going to do that this week. Let's see about the rest of the cast and crew. I think that's really where it comes down to. Is Bachman going to be involved? Is Sage Surratt going to be involved? How consistent will Hartman be? Will Coburn get going in the running game? Will Cade Carney be a factor in the running game? I think Wake Forest is going to need all those guys to beat Notre Dame, but Greg Dortch is definitely worth the start in this game, particularly at home. Nebraska playing on the road at Michigan. For me, the Nebraska offense, if Adrian Martinez is not in there, I'm a little skeptical about starting any of those guys, including J.D. Spielman and Stanley Morgan at wide receiver. If you're in a Power 5 league, you may have to run with those guys, and you know what? That's okay. You can feel okay. I wouldn't. That Michigan team to me has not looked as good as I think many thought they were at the beginning of the year. I spoke last week on how bad I thought the SMU offense was, and of course they flipped the script on me. They throw in the dual threat guy Will Brown in there, and he actually moved the ball pretty well against that Michigan defense. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Nebraska turn out some yards, get some points on the board, but in order for them to have a shot, they need Adrian Martinez. And as far as the running backs from Nebraska go, I'm not sure if there's going to be a clear-cut guy to have that's really gonna challenge to give you double-digit touchdowns. I actually believe that once Martinez comes back, he's going to be the main scoring threat on the ground. He's the guy to own. And Nebraska just put another game up on the board. They did reschedule that Akron game with an FCS opponent, Bethune-Cookman. That's coming up later in the season. I believe it's going to be one of the last few weeks of the year. That Nebraska game that got added against Bethune-Cookman looks like it may be during the fantasy playoffs. That makes Adrian Martinez a late season an attractive addition to add him for late in the season come fantasy playoff time. And over on Michigan, obviously Karan Higdon didn't play last week. I think he gets in that lineup. He has a good week. I think Patterson could do something if you put him in there. Peoples-Jones could do their Power 5 league if you need him. But I'm really leaning on the Michigan running game in this particular matchup, and not a lot more there. Over Boston College playing at Purdue, and really for me it comes down to two guys. A.J. Dillon, which is a must start any week, any defense. I'm starting A.J. Dillon. And right now for Purdue, you're looking at Rondale Moore, who has had 2 good games. The only thing that really concerns me about the Purdue offense, concerns me about a young player, is just which Rondale Moore are we going to get? What Purdue offense are we going to get? Is it going to be consistent? Or is it going to be inconsistent? And that's the chances you take sometimes with the Rondale Moore. We've seen what his ceiling can be, but we also have seen what happens when he doesn't put those numbers up. Sometimes it's a chance that you have to take. So he's not ranked too high in our game, but actually he's not ranked too high in my rankings. But he's one of those guys that I'll point out that could exceed his rankings this week, but because of the inconsistencies, that's why he's not particularly in the top 10 to top 15. Kent State playing at Ole Miss. I think if you have the Ole Miss offense, you run with them. Whether you have Tamu at quarterback, whether you have Brown, whether you have Metcalf, DeMarcus Lodge, I think you get them all in there. Phillips, the running back, you get all your Ole Miss. Those guys, those 4 guys, 5 guys in particular, you roll with. And over on the Kent State side, I don't even know if Ole Miss's defense has been bad. I guess if you really were looking for some outside play, given how bad Ole Miss's defense was, you played DFS. Maybe Woody Barrett is some type of an attractive player if he's cheap. Maybe a Mike Kerrigan at receiver, who I think hit a big one over the top last week. Maybe he's good for a big catch against that Ole Miss defense, who really up until this point has looked bad. As well. So I do expect Ole Miss to roll up a ton of points, and I do expect them to give up quite a few as well. Buffalo playing on the road at Rutgers. I think if you have Raheem Blackshear, this is one of those matchups you're eyeing where, you know what, I've got to get something from him again this week. Gave you a 100-yard game last week. Gets a good matchup against Buffalo. Over in the Buffalo side of things, obviously you've got Tyree Jackson you need to consider starting. You have the young running back now, Kevin Marks, who I think has gone for 2 touchdowns in consecutive weeks. And really for me, the standout performer has been KJ Osborne, really rivaling what Anthony Johnson has done so far. Anthony Johnson high up on the draft board at the beginning of the year, top 5 preseason receiver. Here's one thing that I'll say with Anthony Johnson: be patient. The MAC games are coming. You're about to see an explosion from Anthony Johnson. Be patient, but I do understand some of those owners that need to go out and get KJ Osborne as well to kind of supplement their wide receiver core as well. Minnesota playing on the road at Maryland. Obviously, Bryce Williams has been a really solid find for many of you guys since Rodney Smith went down. I'm assuming maybe Rodney Smith's owners scooped him up off the waiver wire. 58 carries in the last 2 games. He's been an absolute workhorse. Problem with Williams, just like Rodney Smith, is can he find the end zone? And that's where we're getting to up until this point. But I love the guys that are going to give me 25, 30 carries and at least 100 yards. It's almost like a bank for at least double-digit fantasy points every single week, and then the touchdowns become the icing on top of the cake. Akron playing at Iowa State this week. I'm not really looking too much from Akron. I know, Quadarius Smith, Cato Nelson at quarterback. But for me, I think this is a game if you have Iowa State, you get you guys in. To me, this has, I said last week with Bryce Love out, a lot of people were wanted to jump on the backup running backs over at Stanford, and I felt it was a J.J. Arcega-Whiteside game. I feel like this is a David Montgomery game for Iowa State. I think this is a big performance for him this week. Obviously, if you have Hakeem Butler, you get him in there. But for me, I think that this is a David Montgomery game, and this is going to be a big game for his fantasy owners. Ohio playing on the road at Cincinnati. Cincinnati's win at UCLA now doesn't look as impressive as it was the first week of the season. But I have to tell you, I did watch Cincinnati in week 2 as well against Miami of Ohio. I like Cincinnati's defense. I think they're going to play, good, solid defense. They're going to run the ball a lot. I think a lot of the games that they play are going to be low scoring. It wouldn't surprise me if this game is a little lower scoring than many anticipate. I do like Michael Warren, the running back there. And over on the other side, I think Nathan Rourke is a must start for Ohio. I think Poppy White, the wide receiver, is a must start for Ohio as well. Other than that, maybe the Cincinnati tight end is a throw in here if you need somebody in a deep league. But those are the three guys that I'm looking at. Because for me, the Cincinnati offense really is just they're just running the ball, whether it's with the quarterback or Warren at running back. They're really not doing much in the passing game. So for me, Cincinnati's offense starts and ends with Michael Warren. He's a great addition to your lineup this week. Get him into your lineup. Nevada playing on the road at Toledo. Nevada, one of those teams where they've been all over the country, from Vanderbilt back home. They're going across to Toledo now. Brandon O'Leary, Orange, maybe looking like an early season bust. Could be somebody you keep an eye on. Add them to your watch list. But I say this though, when Nevada gets into conference play, unless they're playing Hawaii, those defenses are not easy. For me, the Nevada part of their schedule was the earlier part. I don't know the schedule right now because I don't have it in front of me, but if they're matched up against Fresno, Boise State, San Diego State, not the defenses that you really want to be facing as you're heading down the stretch. But this week, McLean Mannix and obviously Ty Ganji are, you have to get them in your lineup for this week's matchup against Toledo. And I mentioned patience, and Michael Guadagni, the quarterback at Toledo, and I don't know if like I said, don't hold it against me if I mispronounce these names. He's a guy that you've kind of waited patiently on. And now we get Nevada. We move into MAC play. He's got Deontay Johnson. He's got Cody Thompson. I think you're going to see an increase in spike in numbers for him. And I think for me, much like we're waiting for Stephen Carr, the guy that I'm waiting for Toledo is Shaquille Seymour. I think Shaquille Seymour had potential in the preseason, potentially to be a top 10, top 15 fantasy back, what we've gotten from Toledo running backs over the years. Be patient. That's all I can say. Hopefully up until this point, you've gotten somebody to be serviceable for you, that you've made up the point somewhere else. You can't move on from Shaquille Seymour right now. The season is way too early. The guy can go off for 200 and 2 or 3 touchdowns in any given week. Be patient. Maybe this is the week for him. Moving up on down to Navy playing at SMU this week. And I mentioned on last week's show that I was hoping that Zach Abey wouldn't steal touchdowns from Malcolm Perry. I called 3 touchdowns and maybe 200 yards from Malcolm Perry last week, and that's exactly what we got, 3 touchdowns. They weren't all long distance, but he did give you guys 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think he has another solid matchup. He's a must-start this week against SMU, who I have warned folks and everybody on the emails to stay away from SMU quarterbacks right now. Ben Hicks, I mentioned how bad the offense looked with him in there. Will Brown comes in. I think he led 2 second-half scoring drives on the road last week to Michigan. Of course, they were behind, but for me, the most important find in this whole SMU deal was the emergence of James Proche last week, who I almost all but wrote off. And that's where I say the patience needs to come in, because you just never know that third, at fourth, they make a change at quarterback. Now, whether or not that change sticks remains to be seen. Whether they go with Brown or Hicks, we're not sure yet. I hope for the sake of fantasy owners that have Braden West, that have James Proche, maybe even Reggie Roberson, who I don't know if he played last week or if he was banged up, that they go with the youngster because the offense just looks a little better, looks a little more dynamic with him in there. And it showed last week in our road matchup against Michigan, which SMU surprised me on the points that they were able to score on the road at Michigan. Boston College played at Purdue. We covered that game already. Pitt playing on the road against North Carolina. The one thing that I'll mention about North Carolina, I actually like Antonio Williams a little bit more this week than I did at the end of the week than I did at the beginning of the week. Through all the homework that I do, I didn't realize that he was actually, I think he was ejected for targeting in the first half of their last game. And last week's game, I think, got canceled. So I think you get targeted in the first half, I think you have to miss the second half. I'm assuming he's going to be back this week. He could be a nice play for the North Carolina offense this week, playing at home against Pitt, who I believe Quadri Allison has the #1 running back spot locked up. And we went into the preseason, coming out of the preseason into the regular season, assuming that Darren Hall was going to be the assumed starter based on what he did at the end of last year. And up until this point, it's been Quadri Allison, 21 carries, 17 carries in consecutive games. And for me, when you look at the carries on the roster, he has to be the number one guy. I mean, we're getting some trends now, 3 weeks into the season, that we can start to distinguish who the offenses are leaning on. And there's a couple more guys that have trends in their favor that we'll get into as we get into their games. Louisville playing on the road at Virginia. Obviously, every email that has come to me this year that has included a start bench with Bryce Perkins in there has always been to start Bryce Perkins. He was the guy that I was on in the preseason. Bryce Perkins and Olamide Zaccheaus were two of the guys that I absolutely loved. And you know what's happened? Jordan Ellis has also emerged as a three-headed monster in that offense. And so Jordan Ellis has become a start in that offense. So now you've got Perkins, you've got Ellis, and you've got Zaccheaus. The trio have been really kind to fantasy owners this year, and Zaccheaus probably carried a lot of your wide receiver core last week. So big game for him, 200-yard game. Over on the Louisville side, I admit when I'm wrong, Juwan Pass completely whiffed. I missed on Juwan Pass. Juwan Pass, I believed, was going to be the guy that was going to start passing and throw for 350 yards a game in that Louisville offense. And I have to tell you, Juwan Pass's struggles has had a trickle-down effect. It's affected Jalen Smith. It's affected Des Fitzpatrick. I think if you have any of those wide receivers right now, when you look at Malik Cunningham coming in and playing quarterback now at Louisville, who is more effective a runner than he is a passer, those are the guys now that whose fantasy stocks have taken a hit with Juwan Pass moving out at quarterback. So if you need a pickup at quarterback, Malik Cunningham, I think, is worth an addition. I think he's worth a start this week against that Virginia offense. I don't know how effective he will be long term. And I do think Dave Williams is the running back for Louisville. As long as Cunningham is the quarterback, they may form a little bit of a 1-2 run game for that Louisville offense. So he's actually maybe worth an addition in some deep FBS Power 5 leagues as well. Western Michigan playing on the road at Georgia State. I have a feeling this is going to be a good game for Levante Bellamy. The one that concerned, and I just don't have any information. I've gotten emails all week about Dwayne Eskridge. I don't know what happened to Dwayne Eskridge. He didn't show up in the box score last week. There's no evidence to him playing. I have no evidence of him being hurt. I have no evidence of him that he's even going to play this week. And that's those are the pains of college fantasy football. You know, they just don't require to put out an injury report. Then you get these guys from the MAC schools that they missed the game. You have no evidence that they're hurt, whether it was hurt, whether it's disciplinary. And now when this happens, Eskridge becomes a 2-week sit because you almost can't even risk putting him in your lineup this week. So we'll see how that plays out with Dwayne Eskridge. But if you have him, I think you have to err on the side of caution and sit him as well. Miami of Ohio playing at Bowling Green. I like this matchup for 3 Bowling Green players. I think Daggy, the quarterback. I think Quentin Morris, the receiver right now with Scott Miller out. And I think Andrew Clara, all solid plays against the Miami of Ohio defense, which seems to be okay, not great. I said on last week's show, I liked the way that Gus Ragland was targeting James Gardner. I felt it was only a matter of time before he had a breakout game. I think this could be the breakout game for James Gardner of 2018. I think it could start right here, getting into MAC play, as long as the weather's good out there. I'm looking for you James Gardner's owners to get him in the lineups this week. I'm looking for a big game, bounce-back game for him. Western Kentucky playing at Ball State. For me, the name that really just sticks out is James Gilbert, the running back at Ball State. Still waiting for some things to unfold over at Western Kentucky. Illinois State playing at Colorado State. Obviously, Colorado State, we've got Preston Williams, we've got Olabisi Johnson, I think KJ Carter-Samuels. I think all of those guys involved in the passing game are solid starts this week playing against Illinois State. But I do have a gut feeling on a guy, and I'm going to throw him out. He's a guy that I think I added in one of my leagues. One of the guys that I like to take a stab at if I have the depth on my roster to add him before the weekend. I don't know if I'll play him this weekend, but my gut feeling tells me that Marvin Kinsey, the running back at Colorado State, maybe the answer to the running game. It's unusual that Colorado State has not had a running back establish himself as a clear-cut number one. Izzy Matthews has been there forever. Quite frankly, if Izzy Matthews cannot continue what he has done over the past 2 years this year, then I have concerns about the offensive line, because I don't think Izzy Matthews all of a sudden became a non-serviceable running back. But they do need someone with some explosiveness if that line up front cannot run block. And that guy may just be Kinsey this week, who could emerge as the number one running back for Colorado State in an offense in a good matchup against Illinois State this weekend. So let's remember that name as we head into the weekend. Jonathan Ward playing home against Maine for Central Michigan. Central Michigan didn't show up on my defensive rankings. I actually think that Maine's going to give them a game, but I said patience. I've been preaching patience with some of these guys. Jonathan Ward last week, I believe, said, we've got 1 week. This is the weekend. You're a make-or-break weekend with Jonathan Ward. Speaking about the matchup this week against Maine, and Jonathan Ward, I think, still had 16 carries last week. So the progression is to get him more touches. They made a change at quarterback. I think it's Tommy Lazzaro now is starting for Central Michigan at quarterback. Let's see if that jump starts the offense. Obviously, a matchup at Maine is a good formula to jumpstart the offense to get it going. And hopefully this is the weekend Jonathan Ward starts paying off of his fantasy owners and he turns the corner on the 2018 season. Texas A&M playing on the road at Alabama, guys. And look, if you follow me for the last few years, you follow the site, you just know that starting players against the Alabama offense just isn't smart. It happens from time to time. It's just not, that's not where I'm going to put the eggs in my basket. I think if there's one player, however, if I'm looking at starting on the road at Alabama, it may just be the tight end, Jay Sternburger, because you don't need a 100-yard and a touchdown performance from a tight end for it to be solid. PPR league, 4 catches, 50 yards, even if he doesn't, 4 catches, 60 yards, even without a touchdown, gives you a double-digit week. So Sternburger is the one guy for Texas A&M that I'm looking at this week. Now, obviously, if you're in the SEC-only leagues, maybe, and if you're in conference-specific leagues, then you have to roll the dice with Travion Williams and Kellen Mond. But for all of you Power 5 guys, full FBF guys, I'm looking elsewhere right now. And obviously, on the Alabama side, there's more balls to go around than we thought there were. I mean, not only is Najee Harris, Damian Harris, Jerry Jeudy getting catches. You've got Ruggs in there. That could be a factor. Smith, the wide receiver. And now all of a sudden, Irv Smith, the tight end, has become a fantasy factor. So, I don't know if all of those guys are starts in full FBS leagues, with the exception of Jerry Jeudy, who is definitely a must start. And Tago Tagovailoa, who the quarterback is probably a start in 2 quarterback leagues. But for a lot of you guys in Power 5 leagues, there's a number of starts in there, and fantasy-wise for Alabama, it is no longer just a quarterback position. Clemson playing on the road at Georgia Tech. It looks like Kelly Bryant is going to be probable. My guess is that he will play. To me, it's just when both of these guys are healthy, I'm not sure which way they're going to go. I mean, obviously, Kelly Bryant has done a lot of damage when he's been in there. He looked particularly good against the Texas A&M defense in that game. But then Trevor Lawrence comes in next week and looks good. I think that's going to be a formula that we're going to see all season long. I think we're going to see rotation. I think we're going to ride the hot hand. And quite frankly, Clemson's only going to need a good quarterback for maybe 2 games that they play the rest of the year anyway, because they're probably going to beat everybody else 30-something to 10 or 40-something to 20-something. So that may be something we see play out, and the frustration may be there all season long. Now, last week, I was begging and hoping for a Travis Etienne breakout, and we finally got it. So let's see now if Travis Etienne's steam starts to pick up, which is something that I'm actually counting on moving forward. Over at Georgia Tech, I don't know if, Georgia Tech's at home, but Georgia Tech with that triple option is going to become one-dimensional. I don't know if you want to take a chance with Taekwon Marshall this week. I don't know if you want to take a chance with Mason, the running back, this week. I think this is the week you kind of leave your Georgia Tech guys on the side and just say, hey, guys, don't get hurt. Tulane playing on the road against Ohio State. I mentioned this in my exclusive email. I'll say it again. Last week, I had Mike Weber ranked higher than J.K. Dobbins in the rankings. I don't know if I'm ever going to do that again. But here's the warning, and I'll say this. So get Mike Weber ready for all of you guys that have him. Every time Mike Weber goes off, it's like, okay, Weber looks like he has potential to be the number one guy. Are they going to use him more? And then all of a sudden, J.K. Dobbins slowly becomes the guy that just looks like the better running back. And then Mike Weber goes off again. And so I can't rank Mike Weber ahead of J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins just looks like the better back. But now I've done that this week, which means that Mike Weber's probably due a big week. And I don't know if there's some type of a hex or a jinx that I'm putting on the Dobbins-Weber running back rotation, but you have to start Dobbins this week, and let's see what happens with Mike Weber. I'm going to really be laughing in my email when I type up my email if Mike Weber has a big game this week against Tulane. Obviously, Dwayne Haskins is a must-start. Kansas State playing on the road at West Virginia. And obviously, look, here's a guy that needs patience too. It's crazy after one subpar statistical game against a weak opponent and a rainout, and guys are just willing to wheel and deal David Sills, who I think tied for the FBS league in touchdown receptions last year. Like, that amazes me, guys. You have to hold on to guys like David Sills. I mean, David Sills, Gary Jennings, if I could roster both of those guys, I would. That offense is going to be explosive. You have to have patience with guys like David Sills. I mean, look, David Sills to me is he's back up in the top 15 this week. They play Kansas State at home. They're going to have to score points. David Sills is most likely going to play all 4 quarters. You have a part of that West Virginia passing game. You got to stick him in there. On the Kansas State side, I don't know if you have anybody other than maybe Isaiah Zuber, who's had a decent start to the beginning of the year. Maybe you get him in there this week. So Zuber's the play for Kansas State from a fantasy standpoint. For West Virginia running back, though, I did make a note on this, question mark for me. We're still waiting there, but let's be honest, guys. Everything's going through Will Grier in that West Virginia passing game. So right now, I don't want any part of the West Virginia running game anyway, but I'll take as much stock as I could get in Gary Jennings and David Sills right now. Going over to Virginia Tech playing at Old Dominion. I think Josh Jackson has underperformed this week. Curious to see if he gets things going. Damon Hazelton, the wide receiver, should be an okay play for this week. I think if you really need some deep running backs in deep FBS leagues, I think Peoples and McNeese could be options for you. I don't particularly like them, but I think they could give you 60, 70 yards and a touchdown each. But one name I'm gonna have you add to your watch list this week, and I don't think he'll do much this week. But the freshman Lala Davis, the running back freshman for Old Dominion last week, came in. Whether or not they left him in because they were riding the hot hand, but he had 10 carries for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns for that Old Dominion offense. They play at home this week against Virginia Tech. I don't expect any big games from the Old Dominion offense, but I'm curious to see if there's something to watch in this game. Let's see who gets to call the most carries in that Old Dominion backfield, because after this game, the schedule lightens up for the Monarchs, and whoever is the lead back in that offense is going to be the guy to own moving forward, along with Jonathan Duhart. Duhart may be the one guy that you're willing to stick into the lineup this week playing at home against Virginia Tech. Florida International playing at Miami this week. I don't know if I really like anybody at Sean Darius Phillips has been a nice find over at FIU, the running back, but I don't know if this is really a week where you take a chance with any of your FIU players playing against that Miami defense. Malik Rozier has been fantasy solid again. If you remember, guys, Malik Rozier was solid last year from a fantasy standpoint. It's when Miami gets into the tougher matchups where Rozier's ability is going to start being questioned. But as long as they're playing teams like this, he's safe. The question from, obviously you have Jeff Thomas, who has now emerged as a really good fantasy option at receiver. And for me, my eyes are on the Miami running back position, and particularly DJ Dallas. I think DJ Dallas may have established himself as their top option moving forward. Obviously, you still have Homer. I was actually calling for Lingard to get more carries, the youngster. But if Dallas is going to perform, he may end up being the top guy at running back for that Miami offense. So let's see how that plays out. And I do think against FIU's defense that Dallas is worth a play as a flex position running back this week in week 4. Gardner-Webb playing at Appalachian State. Zach Thomas has been really solid as a fantasy option, as a fantasy quarterback. For me, and I mentioned this with the Shaquille Seymours, I'm going to say this about Jalen Moore. Jalen Moore started slow last year, but he was nicked up. Jalen Moore hasn't exactly started strong this year. But this, to me, has a Jalen Moore feel to it. This, to me, could be, and I'm not making a call like I did on Malcolm Perry, last week, but this has the makings of one of those Jalen Moore 200-yard rushing games. We'll see how it plays out. Have patience with Jalen Moore. His best days this year are yet to come, and I think this could be a breakout week for Jalen Moore. Charlotte playing on the road at UMass, and you know what? Andy Isabella, the wide receiver for UMass, was higher in our preseason rankings. He continues to be steady, but not great. He's not being helped out right now at the quarterback position. As of right now, before the show started, last I checked, both of the top 2 quarterbacks for UMass were questionable going into this week. I think Isabella will still get touches. He'll still get catches. I don't expect a breakthrough game for him. However, the one guy in this matchup that I really love is Benny LeMay. Had a lot of emails coming in after the rankings hit the website this morning. Benny LeMay is actually doing it not only on the ground but through the air. This, to me, is if you've got Benny LeMay, you get him in there. If you have a chance to get him off the waiver wire, to stick him in, go with Benny LeMay this week. Big game on the road at UMass. They lean on Benny LeMay, who I believe has had 25 carries in 2 of the first 3 games this season. And I think he may be up to 8 receptions already, which could already be a single-season high for him. I'm not sure. North Carolina Central playing on the road at Duke. Update, Daniel Jones seems to be ahead of progress with his recovery from the broken clavicle. However, for me, if you're looking for a dark horse, this week from a quarterback position, Power 5 league, Quentin Harris has to be your guy. Now, I know some of you are going to take a penalty. There are FCS penalties. But if you're in a pinch in a Power 5 league, Harris could be worth a play. Full FBS, no penalty. I think Harris is worth a play as a quarterback too. So keep that name in your back pocket as you head into the weekend and you evaluate your lineups for this week. Northern Illinois playing at Florida State. Marcus, this game doesn't seem as challenging for Northern Illinois as it did 2 weeks ago, who have played a really challenging schedule. Northern Illinois, I think they've played already Iowa. They've already played Utah. And now they go on the road to play at Florida State. Not great if you have Marcus Childers. You really need to get him into conference play. But that game and matchup doesn't seem too daunting now, given what we've seen out of Florida State. And we said, I'm on the show here preaching patience. And all of a sudden now we've gone from Shaquille Seymour, we've gone to Stephen Carr, we've gone to Jalen Moore, and now all of a sudden we're getting to Cam Akers. And it's like, Cam Akers is actually one of the guys that I'm really worried about. I just don't know. I mean, I saw where Florida State fans have started a GoFundMe to get rid of the coach already. So things could get ugly down at Florida State if they don't pull this one out. I don't like what I see from the Florida State offense. Their line blocking has been absolutely atrocious. Last time I said that about a team, it was last week against SMU, and they had a much better performance. But Florida State, for me, very disappointing. I'm really concerned about Cam Akers. I may be giving him this week, and after that, you may need to package him away, maybe hold on to him if you're in keeper leagues. But I don't like what I'm seeing at all from that Florida State offense. Kansas playing on the road at Baylor. Obviously, you have Puka Williams, who's been a star after in the Kansas 2 wins. And here's what I'll say on that. Be careful, because every time we kind of throw our chips in on a Kansas guy because he has 1 or 2 performances, they pull the rug out from underneath us, and then we're like, okay, well, it was fun while it lasted, but we only got 1 performance because the first performance, nobody owned him, and the second performance, he gave me a good game, and now, he kind of offset that because he gave me a dud in the third matchup. That's my concern with Puka Williams. I almost feel like with a Kansas player, we need to see consistency out of a guy before we just start plugging and playing those guys unless they are playing a really bad team. Now, I'm not saying Baylor's any good. I think if you need to start Williams, you obviously get him in there. I'll warn you, if you have Baylor players, Jermichael Hasty is suspended for the first half of the Big 12 matchup. This is the first Big 12 game for Baylor, so he will be suspended for the first half. Whether that makes John Lovett a nice play, sneaky play for some of you DFS guys, you might want to jump on him if he's cheap in DFS, because Hasty will miss the first half of action. Does Mims return? He obviously was faced with an injury, game time decision last week, didn't play. I think for me, from the receiver position, if Mims plays, he's the guy to have. But if you're looking for a safe, solid option, Jalen Hurd may be the way to go in the Baylor offense. Looking at Oregon State hosting Arizona, I said this last week, guys. Even if you weren't going to get anything from Khalil Tate, you wanted to get him in your lineup because he was going to probably give you enough in a passing game to make him worth a start. That happened. Now, we go into this week. My suggestion on the exclusive email, and if you watch this show, you're going to get my information on that, is I suggested packaging and trading Khalil Tate while his stock is back up. You're going to get another week to do that because you're probably going to get another decent performance this week playing on the road at Oregon State. But we've seen nothing to believe that we're going to get the Khalil Tate from 2017. And my suggestion to a bunch of you guys is if he does have another decent game and you don't see anything from him in the running category, I try to trade Khalil Tate while his stock's up right now. I'm just not seeing enough from him and the way he's utilized to make me think that he's going to be anywhere near the player that he was in 2017. And I think you have to package him while his stock is high. Over at Oregon State, obviously, you've got Jefferson, the running back. As long as he's there, he's going to be gold. I don't know if Trevon Bradford is going to play or if he's going to be hurt. If he's hurt, that makes Hodgins a decent attraction for a fantasy option at receiver. So that's sort of my thought there. And over at Arizona, I do think you kind of have to look at Sean Harris. You do have to look at Poindexter in the passing game as well. This has potential to be an offensive game. Maybe more consistent offense from Arizona, and then the Oregon State offense goes through Jefferson. He is the one that could potentially have a big game for you on the fantasy side. Vanderbilt playing at home against South Carolina. Obviously, things in disarray over at South Carolina, coming off of the hurricane, coming off of a canceled game. I think South Carolina's going to be okay in this matchup. When you look at South Carolina on paper, for me, I see they have Debo Samuels, they have Brian Edwards, Jake Bentley, Rico Dowdle, Tyson Williams at running back. And then over at Vanderbilt, you're going to get Kalijah Lipscomb. They got Keyshawn Vaughn. Vanderbilt has just been steady. The defense has been steady. This is going to be a really good game. But for me, if I have Brian Edwards, I get him in there this week. I just have a feeling Brian Edwards and maybe even Debo Samuel are the difference makers in this contest. And I think South Carolina leans on them, and they find a way to go into Vanderbilt and get a win. And those two guys could be some fantasy options for you in Power 5 leagues, and maybe Edwards if you're playing in a deep FBS at a flex position PPR. Let's see, guys, kind of lost. UConn playing on the road at Syracuse, and, David Pindell has been a good find. I think you're going to get some fantasy points from David Pindell moving forward. Obviously, the offense goes through him. But here's the one thing I'll say about David Pindell. For as juicy as a matchup as this looks like for Syracuse right now, keep this in mind. I actually think this could be one of Dungy's. I know he had a 200-yard rushing game against Western Michigan in week 1. I think this could be one of the running games for Dungy where he gets involved a little bit more. I mean, obviously, you've got Mo Neal and Dante Strickland. I think this is going to be one of those games for Syracuse where where if you have one of the receivers, whether you picked up Custis, whether you have Sean Riley, whether you have Nykeem Johnson, I think you still have to take a chance with those guys this week. But I'm worried that Neal, Strickland, and Dungy are going to hog everything on the ground, guys. UConn are giving up nearly 300 yards a game on the ground. I think that's the second worst statistic, second worst average in the FBS. I think Syracuse is going to do damage on the ground this week at home against UConn. TCU playing on the road at Texas, and This is an intriguing matchup for me because I don't know where to start and I don't know where to stop with this game. I almost feel like when you look at Texas, you like Ehlinger could have a good game. You kind of feel like little Jordan Humphrey can have a good game. When you look at the TCU side, Darius Anderson, he could have a good game. Maybe Sean Robinson, the quarterback, a good game. Jalen Reagor, Kavonte Turpin, a good game. And then I look at this game and I'm like, maybe this game kind of has me. Maybe it's a mirage. Maybe it's a more defensive game than I think it's going to be. And so I'm a little concerned about going in with guys in this matchup this week. This is one of the matchups, Big 12 matchups, where I look at and I'm thinking to myself, maybe not so much offense this week. Maybe the defense comes through. And then I could be completely wrong and they flip the script and go completely offensive on me. I just don't know what to expect in this matchup, and I'm not willing to roll the dice. For some of you all that may be a little bit more courageous to do that than me, then hats off to you, and I wish you well. But this game's a little scary for me. I think if I was forced to play my hand in this game, I would probably go with the quarterbacks, Ehlinger and Robinson, and hope for a little bit of a shootout. And maybe if that's the case, you throw in Turpin, you throw in Humphrey at Texas as the best receiver options. And right now from the running game, I just don't know. I think we're going to get a mixed bag from both sides. We got McNeese State playing on the road at BYU. Obviously, I think if you have Squally Canada, he's a must start this week. Over at North Texas, playing at Liberty. North Texas, if you've got a part of that passing game, Mason Fine, Rico Bussey, Jalen Guyton, you get them in there. Just when I thought it seemed like we had things figured out at the running game with DeAndre Torrey. Lauren Easley had a big game for North Texas last week. It looks like that running game is going to be it's going to be a revolving door. But I see North Texas offense very similar to West Virginia. Super high confidence level in the passing game. So they only need a serviceable running game. So much like West Virginia, where the offense is going to go through Greer, Jennings, Sills in the passing game, this North Texas offense is going to go through Fine, Guyton, Bussey in the passing game. So you get your North Texas guys in there, and now Liberty all of a sudden back on the schedule this week. Antonio Gandy Golden, 3-touchdown game to start the season, needs to get back going for his fantasy owners as well, and hopefully he has a decent game for many of you all out there. Army playing on the road at Oklahoma. Oklahoma, obviously, we're going to start Kyler Murray. But over at the running back spot, I don't know what's going on with Sutton. Obviously, they've already lost Rodney Anderson. If Sutton is going to be out, and I haven't seen anything, but if he is, I think Trey Sermon becomes a must-start this week. So if Sutton is going to be out, add Trey Sermon to your starting active roster this week in a good matchup at home against Army. Louisiana Tech playing on the road at LSU. Obviously, if you've got Nick Brissett, you get him in there as your starting running back. Over on the Louisiana Tech side, let me address Louisiana Tech real quick because this is not just for this week. This is moving forward. Much like Cam Akers with Florida State, I am having some concerns with Teddy Veal at Virginia Tech. You've got Hardy over there. You've got, who's the other guy, Bunnett. I think Veal, we're going to need another couple of weeks to figure out what we're going to be looking at from the Louisiana Tech offense. And I think we're going to be 6 weeks halfway through the season before we realize what the Louisiana Tech offense is. I think Jacquizz Dancy is definitely the player to own for them right now, but I'm not expecting much from Louisiana Tech this week. So we've got to get into week 5, I think, before we start getting back on track and figuring out what's going to go on with that Louisiana Tech passing game. Mississippi State playing on the road against Kentucky. Kentucky, obviously, Benny Snell is going to be in all of your lineups. Terry Wilson and Lynn Bowden obviously have been some really solid fantasy performers up until this point. If you want to take a shot with them at home in a Power 5 league, I completely understand. Mississippi State, a lot of emails coming in about concerns about Kylan Hill. You know, have they moved on? Is it Aris Williams? It looked like he got more carries. Here's some insight I'll give you. It seems to me that Kylan Hill was banged up early on in last week's game, that he got some type of a little nick. And I think they held him out for precautionary reasons. You cannot convince me that Eris Williams is better than Kylan Hill. You have to be a little bit patient on that, guys. You can't knee-jerk reaction just because of one game, and I get it. I get Kylan Hill bombed for many of you guys. He bombed for me. I had him in the top 10 of the rankings. I get that. But that's what happens in college fantasy football, particularly when they're playing a team that's not very good. This is the week they need Kylan Hill. I expect to see Kylan Hill in there. As a matter of fact, I think I have Kylan Hill ranked too low. But for the fact that there's a little bit of uncertainty about the injury, and I don't know guarantee, he didn't carry the ball 20 times last week. He's down there a little bit, but I actually have a lot of confidence that Kylan Hill is the #1 running back at Mississippi State, and I think he has a good bounce back game this week. Texas Tech playing on the road at Oklahoma State, and I think let's look at Texas Tech first. When we look at Texas Tech, obviously you had the emergence of Henry at running back, has had 2 good games in a row. Obviously you had Antoine Wesley, who caught 58 passes for 1,000 yards last week in that matchup against Houston. And then you have guys like TJ Vasher, right? Jadaeon High, the wide receiver at Texas Tech, Alan Bowman, the quarterback. I think they're all worth starts this week. The one thing that I'll warn you is that Texas Tech, for as good as they looked against Houston, they're not playing Houston this week. They're playing at Oklahoma State. I do have a little, I am going to say press pause for a minute. I do think Wesley is worth a start. I think Vasher is worth a start. I think Bowman is worth a start. But guys, I wouldn't expect 13 catches for 200 yards this week. For me, the intrigue is on the Oklahoma State side, because I know what we're going to get with Justice Hill, most likely, as long as he's 100% healthy. But for me, Tylan Wallace has established himself as the top receiver for Oklahoma State. I mean, over my years of watching Oklahoma State since Gundy's been there, we're 3 weeks into the season. If Tylan Wallace is the #1 receiver statistically through 4 weeks, guys, he's the #1 receiver. So to say that I mean, look, I miss Tylan Wallace. I mean, I was projected either Johnson, Stoner, or McCluskey as the top 3 receivers. I have nothing, if I missed Wallace, I missed him. But I'm not missing him on the waiver wire. I have told all you guys to go out there and get him. And guys, that's where college fantasy football is won, is when we miss guys in the preseason and we find the guys before everybody else jumps on them. And that's where you win. That's how you win your leagues in college fantasy football. It's not just the guys that have the solid drafts. You can't draft and then kick your team to the curb and put it on autopilot. It's the guys that make the moves from weeks 1 to 4, weeks 5, and continue to work that waiver wire that ultimately win the leagues. And that's why I say this season is far from over, guys. So Tylan Wallace right now seems to be the top option at receiver at Oklahoma State, and he needs to be in your lineup. Rice playing on the road at Southern Mississippi. Here's the one thing I'll look at. Rice, I think you got Emmanuel Isupka is a start for Rice. You got to get him in your lineup. That offense is going to go through the running game, and he's the guy that you want to have. Over at Southern Miss, Island, you got, obviously you have Kez Watkins, the wide receiver. You have Jalen Adams, the wide receiver. I think both of those guys need to be given consideration. Jack Abraham, maybe. I'm not sure yet. I'm not sold on him. But look, Watkins and Adams, all they need is 6-7 catches, 100-something yards, and a touchdown. And it's worth a start. For me, the surprise for Southern Miss is that there just hasn't been anything close to a replacement for Ito Smith. And right now, you have to shy away from Southern Miss. Tez Parks looks like their top option. But right now, the Southern Miss offense is built around the passing game. And so they no longer have the running back right now that's going to give them 40 catches for the year out of the backfield. So right now, Southern Miss, if I'm going into this matchup, I'm taking Isukpa, the running back from Rice, and Kez Watkins, Jalen Adams maybe as well, the wide receivers for Southern Miss. Texas State playing on the road at UTSA. I think Rivers, the running back, is the only guy worth starting in this game. UNLV playing on the road at Arkansas State. I think Armani Rogers is worth a start. Lexington Thomas, obviously worth a start. Justice Hansen is obviously worth a start at home for Arkansas State. You're going to get the ball spread all around that Arkansas State receiving core. If there's one guy that I want to have this week, it's probably Justin McInnis. He would be the top receiver I would target for that Arkansas State offense. Coastal Carolina playing on the road against Louisiana. I mentioned this. I think it was in the waiver wire piece. Kilton Anderson now 6 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. I think, and look, he's had, I think, at least 65 rushing yards each of those weeks, so he's given it in the air and on the ground. I don't think this is a bad matchup for him. If you need a flyer on a quarterback in a deep FBS league, Kilton Anderson may be your guy this week playing on the road at UL Lafayette. I thought Levi Lewis was going to be the starting quarterback for the Raging Cajuns. It looks like it may be Nunez. Could there be a change this week? Maybe, but I think it's still Nunez, and I think Jamarcus Bradley, the wide receiver, is worth a position if you want to take a shot on him. If you could get him in any DFS leagues or deep FBS leagues, and then obviously Trey Regis, the running back for Louisiana, is a must start. You have to get him in your starting lineups this week. Troy playing on the road at UL Monroe. It looks like B.J. Smith has emerged as the top running back option in Troy. He's still not getting a ton of carries, but he is. I think he's found the end zone every week this season. So I think he's worth a play against a not-so-good UL Monroe offense, who I think if you have Caleb Evans, you get him in there. You have Marcus Green, you go ahead and get him in there. Maybe R.J. Turner as well. I am a little more concerned for the UL Monroe offense this week, considering they're playing Troy. Troy's defense doesn't look like it's as good as it was last week, but guys, they just did go into Nebraska and pull out a win there. So I don't necessarily see UL Monroe coming out of this matchup scoring in the 40s. I think this has potential to be one of those 30-20 games, high 20 matchups. But all the players that I listed are possible fantasy starters this week. NC State playing on the road at Marshall. Now, here's the one thing that I'll say. Tyree Brady is definitely worth starting for Marshall. I did pick up Obialo a couple of weeks ago and stuck him in my starting lineup. He gave me 2 touchdowns. Marshall's game got canceled last week. Is he worth a start this week at home against NC State? He might be. That might be a guy that you want to maybe add to your watch list or maybe add to your roster as Marshall gets into conference play. What I'm really curious to see is, are we ever going to see Alex Thompson for Marshall? Are they waiting for Isaiah Green to struggle? Is Alex Thompson just not healthy? I really don't know. So I hate to tell you to take a chance on Isaiah Green in a matchup against North Carolina State. I think if you have him, you wait a week on him. On the North Carolina State side, it seems to me, and I've watched a couple of their games, the running game has yet to get going. I don't see them having a lot of patience in a road matchup at Marshall. They're not going to be able to ride that running game and wait for it to get going and get cranking. I think you're going to see the passing game get going. Hopefully, Jacoby Myers returns this week with Kelvin Harmon, and Thayer Thomas, who actually emerged in the absence of Jacoby Myers last game. So I think those are your play. I don't know if I'm starting Reggie Gillespie this week, the running back of NC State. This might be a week that I take a look at and reevaluate that NC State running game playing on the road at Marshall. Florida playing at Tennessee. Couple of concerns in this matchup. I don't really see a lot of fantasy gold in this matchup at all. Malik Davis for Florida looks like he's going to miss time with a broken foot or a broken bone in his foot. And I'm wondering now that Ty Chandler is back, how that affects Tim Jordan. Obviously, I think it hurts his fantasy value, and I'm actually now leaning that Ty Chandler is the guy to own in that Tennessee offense from a fantasy standpoint. But remember now, Tennessee is starting to move out of their non-conference schedule into their conference schedule. So I don't necessarily have the confidence that the Tennessee running backs are going to be giving you 100 rushing yards every game now. So this game has potential to have one or maybe two hot finds in it. Maybe Tyson Chandler is that guy at home in a matchup at home against Florida for Tennessee. Auburn playing at home against Arkansas. It looks like I think Devwah Whaley is probable. I'm not sure if he's questionable or if he's been bumped up to probable. Quite frankly, I have trouble right now starting an Arkansas player, particularly on the road at Auburn. On the Auburn side of things, I can't tell you how happy I was to see Jartarvius Whitlow get 20 carries last week and go over 100 yards and score a touchdown against LSU. I have held all my shares of Jartarvius Whitlow stock, and this could be the week where he solidifies himself as that top running back and makes a run for 1,000 yards in 2018. So if you have Jartarvius Whitlow, feel good right now about sticking him in your lineups this week. And hopefully from this week on, he's going to be in your starting lineups. Indiana playing again at home against Michigan State. I think when you look at Michigan State, L.J. Scott, a question mark. I mentioned on the show a couple of weeks ago. I was curious to see, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the year, whether or not Connor Haywood was going to cut into L.J. Scott's carries. Well, Connor Haywood may get the carries this week if L.J. Scott's out. But there's still question marks around that. So I'm a little concerned about playing either guy. The guy that really needs to get back on track for Michigan State is Brian Lewerke, the quarterback. I was expecting a lot better things from him. But like I mentioned, be patient. Big Ten play starting. He's had 2 or 3 games now, a couple of games, and now he needs to get it cranking. Cody White, the wide receiver, I definitely think is a start for Power 5 leagues and deep FBS leagues, particularly in PPR leagues. And over at Indiana, the offense seems to run through Stevie Scott. He's getting a heavy dose. Be curious to see what he can do against Michigan State this week. He could run into a brick wall. We'll see how that plays out. I think if you have Stevie Scott, you may look elsewhere at your depth on your running back. You may look at your running back depth this week. UTEP playing at home against Jason Huntley. Jason Huntley, decent performance last week against New Mexico. I think you can roll the dice with Jason Huntley again this week, playing on the road at UTEP. He never did anything in the first 3 games of the year. This could be where Jason Huntley starts to turn things around a little bit. But looking at that New Mexico State offense, he's never going to give you the games that Larry Rose gave you last year. It's just a different offense, guys. And so I think you need to be content with Jason Huntley giving you 100 yards, a touchdown, maybe giving you 30, 40 yards in the receiving game. That could be his ceiling moving forward on a weekly basis. Stanford playing on the road at Oregon. I can't wait to watch this game. I can't say that I have a lot of fantasy confidence in this game. Obviously, if you have Bryce Love, you get him in there. I think you may give consideration to Arcega-Whiteside. I'm not so sure. I think this is going to be one of those Bryce Love games. And over on the Oregon side, I'm just not sure yet. They have not played any good defenses yet. This is going to be really the first test for Justin Herbert and the Oregon offense. And I have to tell you, my gut feeling right now tells me that you bench everybody in this game with the exception of Bryce Love. That's my gut feeling. We'll see how it plays out. But for me, in this matchup, Bryce Love and maybe Caden Smith, the tight end for Stanford, are the only good plays. Maybe Arcega-Whiteside if you absolutely need him. But for me, this is a Bryce Love matchup. East Carolina playing on the road at South Florida. Blake Barnett almost burned me last week. I talked about how great he'd been open the season. He goes to Illinois. He pulls out 2 late touchdowns. I think he salvaged a 20, 25-point fantasy game for his owners, but for a while it looked like he wasn't even going to get 15 fantasy points, so he did save me on that. I think when you look at the receivers, you've got St. Felix, you've got McCants, you've got Mitchell Wilcox, the tight end, you've got Jordan Cronkrite now, the running back who seems to be, after last week, maybe he's the top guy at the running back position. Those guys all worth a start going up against East Carolina's defense. And I think if you've got Trevon Brown, maybe DeAndre Faria, you take a look at getting both of those guys in your lineups. Texas Southern playing on the road at Houston. I think the Houston offense is going to keep rolling. I think Marquez Stevenson is definitely the guy to have. I think for me, what I'm looking at is the second wide receiver option because Keith Corbin has been better than Courtney Lark. After 1 week, it looked like Lark was going to be the top receiving option or at least one of the top 2. After 3 weeks now, it looks like it may be Stevenson 1, Corbin 2, Lark 3. But let's see if the matchup plays into that now. Easier matchup. Maybe this is time to get back on Courtney Lark this week. So let's see how that plays out. And then running back, obviously they lost Terrence Williams, and maybe this is a week for one of the cars. South Alabama playing at Memphis. Obviously, we've got Brady White, we've got DeMonte Coxey, who's been steady performer, but Darrell Henderson, guys, this offense is going through Darrell Henderson. I was one of those guys that I was concerned that Henderson and Patrick Taylor, they were going to affect one another's numbers like they did last year. But, man, Henderson has looked like a monster. And if he continues the pace that he's on right now, he will finish this season as a top 5 fantasy running back. That's my call. If he stays healthy and the offense continues to look the way that they're looking through 3 games, Darrell Henderson will finish as a top 5 fantasy running back. Let's see how that plays out as the season progresses. Now, here we go. We've got 5 matchups to end the week here. And this is where a lot of uncertainty comes in for me at the running back position. I think there's a theme for these 5 games. Wisconsin playing on the road at Iowa. I don't know if I have an Iowa running back, if I'm starting any of those guys. I think if you have Jonathan Taylor, he's a must start this week, but are you going to get a ton from him in a decent matchup playing on the road at Iowa? I don't know. I think he's going to be solid, but I'm going to be, I mean, look, who's not going to be shocked if he runs? I'm going to be shocked if he runs for 200, 300 yards against that Iowa defense. So, matchup here, tough matchup for the running backs. Wisconsin on the road at Iowa, but you get Jonathan Taylor in. Arizona State playing at Washington. Eno Benjamin, another tough matchup. He already has had matchups against Michigan State. He's already gone up against San Diego State, and now he goes on the road against Washington. I am going to preach patience with Eno Benjamin. I actually have to be honest with you. Arizona State, to me, has looked better than I thought they were going to be. I don't think they're the train wreck everyone was expecting them to be. You may not get much from Eno Benjamin this week. Maybe you stick him in there if you're in a PPR league because what he can give you out of the backfield. But I think he struggles this week. And Myles Gaskin, I don't think Arizona State's defense is that bad. Washington State did gouge them late. But I do think you have Myles Gaskin. You have to start him any week almost against any defense. But he's due for a breakout game. So I'm expecting good game from Gaskin. Maybe Eno Benjamin, you stick him on your bench. But you know what? I know Arizona State's playing at Washington, but for me, N'Keal Harry's just too good of a receiver to not get him in there in at least a flex position in this week's matchup. Air Force playing at Utah State, and for me, Utah, this matchup has 2 players that I'm looking at, and really it just depends on your matchup if you want to take a stab at them in a deep FBS league. Gerald Bright, the running back, and Darwin Thompson, the running back for Utah State. Eastern Michigan playing at San Diego State. I said the last five games there were some matchups involving running backs that I was concerned about. Juwan Washington, and I'm a Juwan Washington owner. I actually own Chase Jasmine as well. He's an insurance policy. That San Diego State offense is just too good not to have the backup running back. Chase Jasmine closed out that game last week because Juwan Washington did have a toe injury, came hobbling off. He did keep his helmet on. I thought he was going to go back into the game to close it out. I thought had the game gone another possession, he might have come in because Chase Jasmine almost fumbled the game away at the end of the game, which is good news if you're an owner for Juwan Washington. They're going to want the ball in his hands, but he has to be healthy. And I heard that he had not practiced up until yesterday. I don't know what the practice report was today, but the plan was that he was still listed as probable and he was still likely to play. My only concern is this. If I know the San Diego State offense, can Juwan Washington log 25 to 30 carries in a matchup against Eastern Michigan, who I do think is a decent opponent, considering that he hasn't practiced all week? I'm not sure. I initially had Juwan Washington a top 5 running back. I bumped him down outside of the top 10. I think I have him at 11. But let's be honest. Whether you have Juwan Washington at 3 or whether you have him at 15, he's starting for you. But my concern is maybe we don't see the 25 to 30 carry game for Juwan Washington. Maybe we see a 19 to 22 carry game from Juwan Washington, and we get 10 to 12 carries from Chase Jasmine this week. And so that's why there's a slight slide down for Washington and a slight bump up for Chase Jasmine this week. And then obviously Duquesne, Hawaii with the late start, obviously going to give everyone over on the East Coast, a reason to stay up to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, because this matchup has potential to be the biggest difference maker to end the week for all the fantasy matchups. Cole McDonald's going to be a start. John O'Suar is going to be a start. Cedric Bird's going to be a start. And then Fred Holley, the running back. So those 4 guys are going to be must starts in this game. So there are going to be a lot of fantasy matchups in full FBS leagues that will not be decided till late Saturday and into the hours of Sunday because of San Diego State. and Hawaii. So, guys, that's all the matchups for this week. I am going to run through the start bench this week, give that to you real quick, call it a week, and wish you guys good luck. So let's get started with it, and a couple of obvious options. This is the bench list for Week 4. Kellen Mond, quarterback, Texas A&M, playing at Alabama. Now, in 3 games this season, and they've all been at home, Texas A&M quarterback Kellen Mond has accounted for 9 touchdowns, 6 passing, 3 rushing in his first road test of 2018. The sophomore quarterback faces an Alabama defense only allowing 9.3 points per game and just over 200 passing yards per game. For me, Kellen Mond is a Week 4 bench at Alabama. Ben Hicks, quarterback SMU, playing at home against Navy. There are probably a handful of owners still holding on to Ben Hicks after all the emails I've gotten this week. I'm quite confident in saying that. But even after he was replaced by Will Brown in the second half of last week's matchup at Michigan, this week's matchup looks so good on paper. As the Navy defense they're allowing over 250 yards per game in the air, but Hicks isn't guaranteed to start. Neither is Brown. And for that reason, a good matchup on paper, Ben Hicks is a Week 4 bench at home against Navy. Another Texas A&M player, Travion Williams, running back, Texas A&M at Alabama, a recurrent theme. Travion Williams, he's off to a solid start in 2018. He's rushed for over 400 yards this year, 399 yards in 3 games. However, the only Power 5 team that Texas A&M have played so far was Clemson. And Clemson limited Travion Williams to 31 yards on the ground at home at Texas A&M. This week, he faces an Alabama defense that has not allowed a rushing touchdown so far this season. And for me, Travion Williams is a Week 4 bench. Stephen Carr, running back, USC at Washington State. I said maybe this is the breakthrough game for Stephen Carr, but can you really chance it? You know, usually the bench list is comprised mostly of players facing some of the tougher defenses in the country, and that isn't the case with USC running back Stephen Carr this week. There's no denying that Carr is probably their most talented back, but he has not carried the ball more than 10 times in any of the first 3 games this year. And until Carr and the UFC offense get rolling, it would be wise to bench him and hold him, but we're not ready to drop him. Stephen Carr, Week 4 bench at home against Washington State. And then Stevie Scott, the last player on my bench list, a running back for Indiana, playing at home against Michigan State. So that makes 3 out of the 5 guys on this list home benches. The 6'3", 235-pound freshman, he's gotten off to an impressive start. He's rushed for 388 yards and 3 touchdowns in 3 games so far for the Hoosiers. However, his 5.6 yards per carry average will probably take a hit this weekend as he faces a Michigan State defense. And I know it's early in the season, but the numbers do speak for themselves. The Spartans are only allowing 34.5 yards on the ground per game, and they've only allowed 1.3 yards per rushing attempt so far this early in the season. And for me, Stevie Scott is a Week 4 sit. Let's go with the Week 5 start list, and I'm going to start at the top with Quadri Allison, the running back Pitt, playing on the road at North Carolina. Allison has topped the 70-yard rushing mark in all 3 games this season. He has rushed for at least 91 yards and a touchdown and has averaged 19 carries in the past 2 games. This week, Pitt faces a UNC defense allowing 190 yards per game on the ground. Quadri Allison, running back Pitt, is a Week 4 start on the road at North Carolina. A name that I am proud to have on this start list, Jatarvius Whitlow, running back Auburn versus Arkansas. It may have taken 3 weeks to sort out, but it seems as if Jatarvius Whitlow is the Tigers' #1 running back. Last week, Whitlow carried the ball 22 times for 104 yards and a touchdown against LSU. This week, I'm confident that the redshirt freshman will find the end zone against an Arkansas defense that has given up 32.7 points per game so far early in the 2018 season. Emmanuel Isukpa, running back Rice. I mentioned get him in your lineups when I was evaluating that matchup earlier in the show. They're playing on the road at Southern Miss. On the season, Emmanuel Isukpa has carried the ball 66 times for 358 yards and 2 touchdowns. The 5'11", 230-pound power back has carried the ball at least 17 times in every game this year, topping the 100-yard mark twice and scoring in 2 of those 3 games. Now, the Southern Miss defense remains one of only 7 teams in the country to not allow a rushing touchdown this year. But I'm expecting the Rice offense and running back Emmanuel Isakpa to knock them off of that list, and he finds the end zone on the road at Southern Miss. Tylan Wallace, wide receiver, Oklahoma State, playing at home against Texas Tech. That's right. Get him in your lineups with 19 receptions for 319 yards and 2 touchdowns through the first 3 games. Tylan Wallace has established himself as the Cowboys' top receiver. On Saturday, Wallace will face a Texas Tech defense that has given up an average of 399 passing yards and 48 points to the 2 FBS opponents that they have faced this year, Ole Miss and Houston. Get Tylan Wallace, get that Oklahoma State offense in your starting lineup. And the last player, Benny LeMay, running back Charlotte at Massachusetts. Road matchup, but I'm getting Benny LeMay in my lineup. He has been a workhorse. He has carried the ball at least 25 times in 2 of Charlotte's first 3 games and has totaled 385 yards of offense, 263 yards rushing, 122 yards receiving. This Saturday, LeMay will face the 7th worst run defense in the FBS. UMass are allowing 266.3 yards per game on the ground, and they are also one of only 4 teams, UMass that is, to give up at least 11 rushing touchdowns this season. Benny LeMay, get him in your lineups. He's a week 4 start. Look, guys, I've had fun again. We've gone another 80 minutes, but like I said, I've said this all last year. I can go on for another 2 hours if I wanted to, but I can't. I got to get you guys off. I want to get off. I have a family I've got to get to. But listen, it's been fun. Week 4 is here. It's moving week for a bunch of you guys. I'm hoping a lot of the outcomes are starting to switch for some of you all that had some bad starts. Good starts on the horizon as conference matchups now heat up. Let me see if I can get to some of your questions before I get off, guys. I can go. Start 3, Power 5 only. Hakeem Butler, Martin with Washington State, Lipscomb, Vanderbilt, Humphrey, Texas, and Mims, Baylor. But thinking Butler and Martin, unsure on Mims with the injury. And I have to say, he's the guy that I would get in the lineup if he were healthy. If it wasn't Mims, I would actually probably go with Lipscomb, who has been a target magnet this year for Vanderbilt. So he is my plan B. Emailed you about picking up Love on the waiver wire, but I didn't get him. Same question with Swift from Georgia. Is he worth picking up? Man, I mean, here's the thing. If DeAndre Swift is out there on the waiver wire, you have to go ahead and get him. Somebody emailed me saying Benny LeMay was on their waiver wire. For me, that's a no-brainer. I mean, that's a guy that could possibly put you over the top this weekend. I need help in the flex spot this week. I have DJ Dallas, running back Miami, DK Metcalf, wide receiver Mississippi. Any thoughts? I have to tell you, this comes down to one of the options that I don't have. Is it a PPR? Is it not a PPR? If it's a PPR league, I think I may take a chance on DK Metcalf with Ole Miss, even though I do like DJ Dallas this week. But PPR format, I'm going to go with Metcalf and that Ole Miss offense. And he said, you just answered my question. He's going with DJ Dallas, and I just completely said, go with Metcalf. So here we go, guys. Here's what I say. I'll end this. This is the way that I'll end the show. And this is what I say. For a lot of you guys, too, there's still a lot of questions coming in about the differences between the rankings and the projections, and I'll throw it out there one more time, and I think this is really important to understand. The rankings is everything that I give you from all of my homework throughout the week. That's what I come with, and that's what I give you guys here on the show every single week, and that's what I put up there on the expanded rankings every week. The projections are just a supplemental tool. The projections do not project the numbers of players of where I have them ranked. They are a completely independent algorithm based on historical data, projected data. That's what you're getting with the projections. And you do have to be careful, guys. I mean, look, some guys are emailing me about the difference between 2 different players. And, you know, when you look at the projections, there is maybe a 20-spot difference, and the difference between fantasy projected points might be 1.5 fantasy points. For me, when you've got guys in tiers, when you look in the projections and you see one guy projected to get 12.2 fantasy points and another guy 20 spots down is getting 13.2 projection fantasy points. You almost got to take that group of guys and say, based on all of the research and homework that I've done, all of the stuff that Joe's given me in his rankings, let me use this to supplement that and my own homework and make the decision. And really, that's what the projections are there for, guys. Take my rankings, take everything I give you on the show, supplement that with the projections, and make your final decisions. Remember, I love giving start bench advice, but I try to give advice, or I try to lead you one way or the other on what I think could unfold. And you ultimately should make the final decision, because you have to live with knowing that you benched or started a player. I never want you to say, I knew I should have started that guy. Joe missed it, and I went with Joe's player. And you know what? And I do miss some guys. I'm not perfect. I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do. I'm here to help guide you for you to make the smartest decisions that you can make for your rosters on a week-to-week basis. And I hope that the CFF site and me personally, that is my goal, to give you guys enough information to make smart decisions with your rosters, that you don't leave anybody on the bench that you're supposed to, like Benny LeMay, or you don't start anybody that's a question mark and then you take a 0 for that guy. Just trying to give you guys as much insight as we can. That's all we can do as a college fantasy football website, because Lord knows there's not a ton of us out there. And I love what I do. I'm so passionate about what I do. I just love it, guys. I love answering the emails, and I love giving you guys all of this advice every single week. So I'm sorry to go off on a tangent and prolong the show. Thanks, everyone that stayed on for me. Email me with any roster questions that you might have this week. Good luck this week, guys, and I'll see you in week 5.